specific kind of exhaustion that most people will never understand. It isn't physical tiredness. It isn't even emotional burnout in the conventional sense. It's the cumulative weight of perceiving layers of reality that others simply don't register, and the profound isolation that comes from living in a world where your natural way of processing information alienates you from nearly everyone around you. Deep intuitives, those who correspond to the INFJ, INTJ, INFP, and INTP personality types, don't just observe the surface of social interactions, systems, or ideas. They automatically decode the invisible architecture beneath, the unspoken power dynamics in a room, the logical inconsistencies in widely accepted beliefs, the emotional undercurrents that dictate behavior, the long-term trajectories that others can't see forming. And while this creates real dangers that Carl Jung identified in his work, it also unlocks a way of engaging with reality that's capable of extraordinary insight, creation, and impact. But here's what most content about intuitive types gets wrong. They either romanticize this ability as a pure gift or dismiss it as overthinking. The reality is far more complex and far more important to understand if you're wired this way. Stay with me in this video because I'm going to show you what it's really like to see what others don't, both the curse and the hidden power, and the 4 essential techniques that deep intuitives use to transform one into the other. This isn't about being smarter or better. It's about having a cognitive wiring that compels you to process reality through pattern recognition, abstraction, and deep analysis, often involuntarily. And that wiring creates both profound challenges and remarkable capabilities that most people will never experience. The curse and gift of pattern recognition. Deep intuitives experience what psychologists call automatic pattern detection. Their minds constantly extract underlying structures from information. And here's the danger. You can't unsee patterns once you've identified them. You notice the small behavioral inconsistency that predicts a relationship will fail 6 months before it does. You recognize the flawed assumptions in a company strategy that will lead to collapse. You see the emotional manipulation in someone's seemingly generous gesture. You detect the logical fallacy that undermines an entire argument. And you carry this knowledge alone because explaining your perception to others often makes you seem paranoid, negative, or arrogant. But here's what makes this same ability powerful. You also see the emerging opportunities that others miss entirely. You recognize the connection between seemingly unrelated fields that leads to innovation. You detect the early signals of cultural shifts before they become obvious. You identify the one variable that will make or break a complex project. When a deep intuitive walks into a struggling organization and immediately sees the actual problem, not the surface symptom everyone's focused on, but the underlying structural issue, that's not magic. That's pattern recognition cutting through noise. Jung observed that intuitive types live partially in a world of potentialities and emerging patterns that haven't yet manifested. The danger is isolation when others can't see what you see. The power is that you're often right, and that foresight, when trusted and applied, creates genuine advantage in navigating complexity. But pattern recognition is just the beginning. What happens when you can't turn off this deep processing? When your mind refuses to stay on the surface, even when you desperately need rest? Stay with me, because what I'm about to reveal explains why so many deep intuitives feel chronically drained, and why that exhaustion contains a hidden richness most people never access. The exhaustion and richness of depth. Yes, there's a specific type of fatigue that comes from being unable to turn off deep processing. While others enjoy a movie at face value, deep intuitives are simultaneously analyzing narrative structure, psychological subtext, and thematic implications. Their minds don't rest on the surface. This creates constant friction in a culture that values speed and simplicity over depth. Most conversations feel frustratingly superficial. Small talk can feel like psychological suffocation. Mainstream explanations for complex issues seem insultingly reductive. But here's the other side. When you do encounter depth, a brilliant film, a meaningful conversation, a complex problem worth solving, a piece of art that operates on multiple levels, your experience of it is incomparably richer than what most people access. You don't just consume content, you enter into relationship with it. You find layers of meaning that create profound satisfaction. The book that changed your life didn't just entertain you, it reorganized your understanding of reality. The problem you solved at work wasn't just a task completed. It was a puzzle that engaged your entire cognitive apparatus in a state of flow. Where others need constant novelty, you can find endless depth in a single subject, relationship, or pursuit. That ability to go deep rather than wide creates a form of richness that shallow engagement can never access. But here's the question nobody asks. If you can experience such richness, why does it so often feel like you're completely alone in it? What happens when the depth you crave exists nowhere in your social world? The answer to this reveals the most painful aspect of the deep intuitive experience and also its most transformative possibility. Keep watching. The loneliness of being misunderstood and the power of selective connection. The chronic loneliness is real. Deep intuitives often report a lifelong sense of being different, of not quite fitting anywhere, of having to translate their internal experience into a simplified version that others can grasp. You learn to code switch between your actual thoughts and what's socially acceptable to say. You develop an outer persona while your real self remains largely hidden. But here's what this creates. When you finally do connect with someone who operates at your depth, the quality of that connection is extraordinary. You've developed the discernment to recognize genuine resonance when it appears. Deep intuitives who've navigated this successfully often have smaller social circles but deeper relationships. They've stopped trying to force connection everywhere and started investing in the rare relationships where they can show up fully. And those connections become profound sources of meaning. Moreover, this selectivity often leads deep intuitives to the exact people, communities, and causes where their perceptual gifts are most needed. You're not for everyone, and that's actually perfect. Your isolation pushed you to find where you actually belong. Now, you might think that once you find your people, the hard part is over. But there's another trap waiting, one that catches even the most self-aware deep intuitives. What happens when you can see every angle, every possibility, every potential outcome? When your mind won't let you commit because it keeps showing you complications others don't see. This next piece is crucial, so stay with me. The paralysis of seeing too many angles and the wisdom of complexity. The ability to see multiple perspectives, possibilities, and outcomes can create decision-making paralysis. You see the validity in contradictory positions. You understand the limitations of every option. Others move forward with confidence because they don't see the complications you see. And you can get stuck in analysis, watching opportunities pass while you're still evaluating implications that others never considered. But this same capacity, when channeled effectively, makes you exceptionally good at navigation in genuinely complex domains. While others are oversimplifying their way into preventable disasters, you're accounting for second- and third-order consequences. Deep intuitives often excel in fields that require holding complexity, strategic planning, systems design, research. They become the people others turn to when simple answers have failed. The key is learning to trust that your complexity processing serves a real function. You're not overthinking, you're thinking appropriately for actually complex situations. What looks like paralysis becomes thorough analysis that prevents costly mistakes. But there's one more layer to this that we need to address. Perhaps the heaviest burden of all. What happens when you can see what's coming, when your pattern recognition tells you exactly how things will unfold, but no one listens. When you become right about things you desperately wished you were wrong about. This is where the deep intuitive experience gets truly existential. Stay with me for this next part. The burden and gift of prescience. Watching predicted outcomes unfold when you couldn't prevent them is emotionally difficult. You warned the friend about relationship red flags they ignored. You saw the professional disaster coming. This can lead to a dark form of resignation, feeling like Cassandra, cursed with accurate prophecy that no one believes. But here's the reframe. Every time your pattern recognition proves accurate, you're also building a deep trust in your own perception. You're developing what Jung called intuitive authority, internal certainty about what you're perceiving. And sometimes people do listen. Sometimes your warning saves someone. Sometimes your foresight positions a team to capitalize on an opportunity. Your ability to say, "This is what's actually happening, and here's what comes next," changes outcomes in ways that matter profoundly. Your prescience isn't just a burden. It's a form of perception that, when properly valued and applied, creates genuine protective and strategic value for the people wise enough to trust it. So here's where we are. You've seen the curse and the gift in each dimension of deep, intuitive perception. But knowing this isn't enough. The real question is, how do you actually transform the curse into power in your daily life? What are the specific, actionable techniques that make this shift possible? That's what I'm about to show you now. 4 essential skills that change everything. So here are the 4 essential techniques that successful deep intuitives use to transform perceptual burden into strategic advantage. Technique 1. Master differentiation. This comes directly from Carl Jung's idea of differentiation. Differentiation is the ability to consciously control when you engage your deep intuitive processing and when you let it rest. It's not suppression, it's strategic deployment. Learn to distinguish between situations that genuinely require complexity analysis and those that don't. Not every conversation needs to be deep. Ask yourself, does this situation actually benefit from my depth, or am I just defaulting to my natural mode out of habit? Save your depth for what actually matters, and you'll have more impact when you do deploy it. Technique 2. Build your evidence file. Start deliberately tracking when your pattern recognition proves accurate. Keep a journal or mental record of predictions that came true, insights that created value, problems you identified early. This isn't about ego, it's about counteracting the gaslighting effect of living in a world that constantly suggests your perceptions are wrong. When you have concrete evidence that your way of seeing produces accurate results, you develop calibrated confidence, trust in your perception that's proportional to its actual reliability. Technique 3. Find your context and your people. Stop trying to force yourself into environments that punish depth. Your cognitive wiring isn't suited for every job or every social circle, and that's not a flaw. Deep intuitives thrive in specific contexts. Complex problem-solving roles, strategic positions, creative work. Simultaneously, seek out the people who actually get it. Deep intuitives represent roughly 8 to 10% of the population. They exist, but you won't find them everywhere. When you concentrate your energy where your perception is actually valued, everything shifts. You're no longer constantly swimming against the current. Technique 4. Learn translation without dilution. Your insights are only powerful if others can receive them. Learn to communicate your complex perceptions in accessible language without dumbing them down. This is a learnable skill that creates bridges between your internal complexity and external impact. Start with the conclusion or implication, then work backward to explanation only if needed. Use concrete examples. Instead of, "I'm observing a structural misalignment between stated organizational values and operational incentive systems that's generating perverse feedback dynamics." Try, "I think I see why this problem keeps happening. The way things are currently set up actually rewards the behavior we're trying to eliminate." Same insight, accessible delivery. When you master translation, your depth becomes influence rather than isolation. And when you finally learn to use these techniques and bring all four together, you start to notice something subtle but life-changing. The same mind that once isolated you now becomes your greatest ally, simply because you've learned to integrate your gift. Here's what integration actually looks like in practice. You accept that your cognitive wiring creates both challenges and capabilities. You develop the specific skills, differentiation, evidence building, strategic positioning, translation that allow you to work with your wiring rather than against it. You find the rare people who actually understand you. You seek out problems complex enough to require the kind of perception you bring. You learn when to engage your depth and when to rest on the surface. And gradually, the curse becomes workable. The power, the genuine capacity to see what others don't and use that sight to create value, becomes accessible in ways that matter. You're not broken for perceiving this way. You're wired for a specific form of engagement with reality. The world wasn't built for you, but it genuinely needs what you see. The difference between deep intuitives who suffer and those who thrive isn't the elimination of the burden. It's the development of these four essential skills that allow them to access the power while managing the cost. If this resonates, leave a comment about which aspect of the deep intuitive experience hits hardest for you right now, or which of the four techniques you most need to develop. If you want more content that honors both the struggle and the strength of deep intuitive processing, hit subscribe so you don't miss it. And share this with someone who needs permission to claim their perceptual gifts without pretending the burden doesn't exist. Because the real tragedy isn't seeing too much, it's never learning to trust what you see. Never realizing that the curse was your calling all along.